They laughed when the bearded mountain man dragged his belongings into the rotting log shack on Crooked Ridge, called him crazy for choosing decay over comfort. But when the floorboards gave way and revealed what was buried 30 feet below, their laughter died in their throats. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning fog clung to Timber Falls like a secret refusing to be told. Main Street stretched barely 3 blocks, lined with weathered storefronts and the kind of judgment that small mountain towns wore like Sunday clothes. At the edge of the valley, where the pines grew so thick they swallowed sunlight, sat a log shack nobody had entered in over 40 years. Until today, Marcus Brennan pulled his rusted Ford pickup into the overgrown driveway, the truck bed loaded with everything he owned, which wasn't much. At 52, he'd lived more years in the mountains than among people, and he liked it that way. His beard was long and graying, his hands scarred from decades of rough work, and his eyes carried the quiet intensity of someone who'd learned to listen to silence instead of noise. He stepped out of the truck, boots sinking into mud still soft from last night's rain. The shack loomed before him, sagging on its foundation like an old man too tired to stand straight. The logs were dark with rot, the roof patched with mismatched shingles and rusted tin. 2 windows gaped like hollow eyes, glass long since shattered. The porch leaned so far to one side it looked ready to surrender to gravity. Marcus had inherited the place from his uncle Raymond, a man he'd met exactly twice in his life. The lawyer's letter had been brief, typed on yellowed paper, and delivered to the post office box Marcus checked once a month. Property on Crooked Ridge. It's yours if you want it. No one else does. He'd driven 12 hours from his cabin in Montana to see it. Now, standing in the weeds with rain dripping from the brim of his hat, he understood why no one wanted it. The place looked cursed, but Marcus didn't believe in curses. He believed in work, in fixing what was broken, in solitude. And this shack, broken as it was, offered all 3. He grabbed a duffel bag from the truck bed and walked toward the porch. The first step groaned under his weight. The second cracked clean through. He tested each board carefully after that, distributing his weight, moving like a man crossing thin ice. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, and when he pushed it open, the smell hit him first. Mildew, rodent nests, decades of abandonment compressed into a single breath. Inside was worse than he'd imagined. The main room was maybe 20 by 20 feet, with exposed beams overhead and a stone fireplace crumbling at one end. The floor was warped and stained, sections missing entirely, wallpaper peeled in long, mouldy strips. A rusted wood stove sat in the corner, its pipe disconnected and lying across the floor like a fallen tree. Marcus set his bag down and stood in the center of the room. Most people would have walked right back out. But he saw potential. Strong bones beneath the decay, solid logs under the rot, a foundation that had held for over a century. He heard voices outside and turned. Through the broken window, he saw them. 3 men standing by the road, arms crossed, staring. One pointed, another laughed. Marcus recognized the type, locals with nothing better to do than watch someone else's business and judge it. He stepped back onto the porch, careful to avoid the broken boards. The men didn't move, just kept staring. Finally, one of them called out, "You the crazy bastard who bought Raymond's place." Marcus didn't answer right away. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket, lit one, and let the smoke curl into the damp air. "I'm the one who inherited it," he said finally. The man who'd spoken was thick around the middle, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap with a feed store logo. He grinned, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, hell, I hope you got it for free because that place ain't worth the nails holding it together." The other 2 laughed. Marcus took another drag and studied them. Small-town gatekeepers. The kind of men who measured worth by property value and judged strangers by their boots. "It'll do," Marcus said simply. "It'll do?" The man shook his head. "Mister, that shack's been condemned since 1998. Roof's gonna cave in first good snow, foundations sinking on the north side, and the well's been dry for 20 years. "Then I'll fix it," Marcus replied. That earned more laughter. The second man, tall and lanky with a tobacco-stained mustache, leaned against the fence post. You some kind of carpenter? I'm some kind of man who knows how to work, Marcus said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. The first man spat into the weeds. Raymond was crazy too. Lived up here alone for 30 years, talking to himself, scaring off anyone who came close. Folks said he'd gone feral. Guess it runs in the family. Marcus crushed his cigarette under his boot. You boys have a nice day. He turned and walked back into the shack, letting the door swing shut behind him. Through the gaps in the walls, he could still hear them laughing as they walked away. Their voices faded into the trees, and silence returned. He didn't care what they thought. He'd spent his whole life being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. It used to bother him. Now it was just background noise. Marcus spent the rest of the day unloading his truck. He didn't have much. A canvas tent for sleeping until the roof was fixed. Tools, carefully maintained and organized. A camp stove. A cooler with 3 days of food. A rifle because out here alone, you didn't take chances. And a small wooden box that held the few things he cared about. Letters from his mother, long deceased. A photograph of his younger brother, killed in Iraq in 2003. A pocket knife his father had given him before disappearing into the bottle and then into the ground. He set up the tent in the driest corner of the main room, away from the leaking sections of roof. As the afternoon light dimmed, he built a small fire in the stone fireplace, carefully clearing out the debris first and checking the flue. It drew surprisingly well. He sat cross-legged on the floor, eating beans straight from the can, and stared into the flames. The shack groaned and settled around him. Wind whistled through gaps in the logs. Somewhere in the walls, mice scratched and scurried. But Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite peace, but possibility. By the time darkness fell, he was exhausted. He crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and fell asleep to the sound of rain beginning to fall again. The next morning arrived cold and grey. Marcus woke before dawn, as he always did, and stepped outside to relieve himself in the woods. The air smelled of wet pine and earth. Mist rolled through the valley below, making the town disappear. Up here, he could pretend civilization didn't exist. He spent the morning assessing damage. The roof needed complete replacement in sections. The porch had to be torn down and rebuilt. The windows required new glass and frames. The well, just as the man had said, was dry. He'd need to drill a new one or haul water from town until he could afford it. But the foundation, despite what they'd said, was solid. The logs were rotted on the outside but sound beneath. It was salvageable. All of it. He started with the floor. If he was going to live here, he needed a stable surface to walk on. He began in the northeast corner, prying up the warped boards one by one. Underneath, the joists were surprisingly intact, though covered in decades of dirt and rodent nests. As he worked, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold, he heard a vehicle approaching. He looked up to see a sheriff's cruiser pulling into the driveway. A woman stepped out, tall and lean, wearing a tan uniform and a skeptical expression. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her hand rested casually on her belt near her sidearm. "Morning," she called out. "You Marcus Brennan?" "I am." She walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. "I'm Sheriff Cole. Got a call from some concerned citizens saying someone was trespassing on the old Brennan property." Marcus set down his pry bar. "I'm not trespassing, I own it." "You got paperwork?" He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked to his truck, pulled out a folder from the glove box and handed it to her. She scanned the documents, her expression unreadable. "Inherited from Raymond Brennan," she said, more to herself than to him. She looked up. "You know anything about your uncle?" "Not much. Met him twice when I was a kid. He was a strange one. Kept to himself. Ran off anyone who came near. The county tried to condemn this place years ago, but he fought it. Died alone up here 3 months back. Took us 2 weeks to find the body." Marcus didn't respond. What was there to say? Sheriff Cole handed back the papers. "Look, I don't care what you do with this place, but people in town are already talking. They think you're as crazy as he was." I don't much care what people think." She almost smiled at that. "Fair enough. Just keep your nose clean and we won't have problems. And if you're planning to stay through winter, you better get that roof fixed. Snow comes hard up here." "I intend to." She nodded and walked back to her cruiser. Before getting in, she turned. "One more thing. Your uncle had a reputation for being paranoid. Said people were after something he had. Most folks figured it was just his mind going. But if you find anything unusual up here, anything that doesn't seem right, you call me. Understood?" Marcus frowned. "What kind of unusual?" "Just call if something feels off." She drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway with more questions than answers. After something? What could a hermit living in a rotting shack possibly have that anyone would want? He went back to work, trying to shake off the unease. By mid-afternoon, he'd cleared most of the rotten floorboards from the northeast section. The joists underneath were exposed now, and he could see down into the crawl space beneath. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the darkness. That's when he noticed it. One of the foundation stones looked different from the others. While most were rough-cut granite, weathered and settled, this one was smooth, almost polished, and around its edges, barely visible in the beam of his flashlight, were chisel marks, deliberate, precise. Marcus knelt at the edge of the exposed floor and leaned down for a closer look. The stone didn't fit flush with the others. There was a gap, maybe half an inch, running along three sides. His pulse quickened. He grabbed a pry bar and carefully lowered himself into the crawl space. It was tight, barely 3 feet of clearance, and the dirt was damp and cold. He crawled toward the stone, his flashlight clenched between his teeth. Up close, there was no doubt. This stone had been placed intentionally. Recently, relatively speaking. While the others were mortared solid, this one sat loose in its frame. He wedged the pry bar into the gap and pulled. The stone shifted. Dirt cascaded down. He pulled harder, and with a grinding sound that echoed in the confined space, the stone slid free. Behind it was a hole, not just a gap in the foundation, but a deliberate opening, maybe 2 feet square. Marcus aimed his flashlight inside. Steps, carved into stone, leading down into darkness. His breath caught. For a long moment he didn't move, just stared into that black mouth descending into the earth. Every instinct screamed at him to be careful, to think this through, to call someone. But curiosity was louder. He pulled the stone completely free and set it aside. The opening was just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He tested the first step. Solid. Carved from the same bedrock the shack's foundation rested on. Marcus pulled himself back up through the floor and grabbed his larger flashlight, a heavy-duty one he used for night repairs. He also grabbed his rifle. Not because he expected trouble, but because going into an unknown space unarmed was stupid. He climbed back down into the crawl space and aimed the flashlight into the opening. The steps descended at least 20 feet before disappearing into a turn. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and the air coming up smelled stale, but not foul. Not recent. This tunnel, if that's what it was, had been here a long time. Marcus squeezed through the opening, his broad shoulders scraping against stone. His boots found the steps, and he began to descend. Each step was approximately 8 inches deep, worn smooth in the center, as if from years of use. The temperature dropped as he went deeper, and the sound of his breathing echoed off the walls. 20 steps down, the passage turned sharply left. He followed it, flashlight sweeping the darkness ahead. The tunnel widened here, tall enough to stand upright. The walls showed tool marks, methodical and deliberate. Someone had spent months, maybe years, carving this space from solid rock. 30 more steps, and the tunnel leveled out. Marcus found himself in a corridor, roughly 6 feet wide and 7 feet tall. The floor was smooth stone. Support beams hewn from logs crossed the ceiling at regular intervals. This wasn't some natural cave. This was engineered. He moved forward slowly, rifle in one hand, flashlight in the other. The corridor stretched ahead maybe 50 feet before opening into what looked like a larger space. As he approached, his light caught something metallic. Then more metal. His pace quickened. The corridor opened into a chamber. Marcus stepped inside and swept his flashlight across the space. His jaw went slack. The room was approximately 30 feet square, with a ceiling held up by thick timber supports. Against one wall stood metal shelving units, the industrial kind you'd find in a warehouse. And on those shelves, stacked in neat rows, were wooden crates, dozens of them. Marcus approached the nearest shelf. The crates were old but well preserved, constructed from heavy planks and sealed with metal bands. Most had numbers stenciled on the side, but no other markings. He set down his rifle and pulled one of the smaller crates from the shelf. It was heavy, maybe 40 pounds. He found a gap between the lid and the frame and worked his fingers underneath. The wood was dry and brittle. With a crack, the lid came free. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were gold bars, 6 of them, each one stamped with assay marks and serial numbers. Marcus lifted one. It was cold and impossibly heavy in his hand. He'd never held gold before, but he knew what it was worth. A single bar this size, maybe 10 pounds, was worth well over $200,000. His hands started to shake. He set the bar back carefully and looked around the room with new eyes. There were at least 50 crates on the shelves. If even half of them contained gold, if even a quarter of them did, he was standing in a fortune. But that wasn't all. Along the opposite wall were more shelves, and on these sat smaller boxes, lockboxes, and what looked like old safes. Marcus approached slowly, his mind reeling. He opened one of the boxes. Cash, bundles of $100 bills, wrapped in plastic. The bills were old, from the 1970s and 80s, but currency didn't expire. Another box held jewelry, not costume jewelry, but the real thing. Diamond necklaces, gold watches, emerald rings, all carefully wrapped and stored. A third box contained documents. Marcus pulled one out and unfolded it. It was a deed to property in California, dated 1976. Another was a stock certificate. A third was a passport, but the photo had been removed. He stood in the center of the chamber, turning slowly, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. His uncle Raymond, the crazy hermit who died alone, had been sitting on a fortune. Not just a fortune. $200 million, maybe more. But where had it come from, and why hide it here? Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Robbery, tax evasion, something darker? His uncle had been paranoid, according to the sheriff. Said people were after something. Maybe he'd been right. A sound echoed from the tunnel behind him, faint but distinct. A scraping, like boot on stone. Marcus froze. His flashlight was the only light source, and he'd left a clear trail to follow. He grabbed his rifle and flicked off the flashlight, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then he heard it again. Footsteps. Someone else was in the tunnel. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been so focused on the discovery that he hadn't considered someone might be watching the shack. Watching him. Sheriff Cole's words came back. If you find anything unusual, call me. Too late for that now. The footsteps grew closer. Marcus moved silently toward the wall, putting the shelves between himself and the corridor entrance. He raised the rifle, finger on the trigger guard, waiting. A light appeared in the tunnel. Flashlight beam sweeping left and right. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall, every muscle tense. The light entered the chamber, illuminating the crates and boxes. A figure stepped into view, silhouetted against their own flashlight. Not tall, but solid, moving carefully, deliberately. Then a voice, rough and female, called out softly, "I know you're in here. I can see your footprints in the dust." Marcus didn't move. The figure took another step inside, light sweeping the room. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Ellen. I knew your Uncle Raymond. And if you found what I think you found, we need to talk, right now, before the wrong people figure out you're here." Marcus's grip on the rifle tightened. Every instinct told him not to trust strangers, especially ones who followed you into hidden tunnels. But something in her voice, a weariness, a resignation, made him hesitate. "How do I know you're not the wrong people?" he called back. The figure turned toward his voice. The flashlight lowered slightly, no longer blinding. "Because if I was, you'd already be dead." Marcus stepped out from behind the shelves, rifle still raised but not quite pointed at her. In the combined glow of their flashlights, he could see her clearly now. She was maybe 65, with short grey hair and a weathered face. She wore jeans and a canvas jacket, and her eyes were sharp despite her age. "Start talking," Marcus said. Ellen looked around the chamber at the crates and boxes, and something like sadness crossed her face. "Your Uncle Raymond spent 35 years protecting this," she said quietly, "and it cost him everything. His sanity, his relationships, his life. He died alone because he couldn't trust anyone. But he made me promise something before he passed." "What?" She looked directly at Marcus. "That if anyone ever inherited this place and found what he'd hidden, I'd tell them the truth. The whole truth. Because the people who are going to come looking for this, they're powerful, they're ruthless, and they're closer than you think." Marcus lowered the rifle slightly. "What people? What is all this?" Ellen took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades. "This isn't stolen money, not exactly. It's evidence. Your Uncle Raymond, back in 1978, witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. A transaction between a senator, a crime family, and a foreign government. He was a driver, wrong place, wrong time. They tried to kill him, but he escaped. And he took this with him. Insurance. Proof." Marcus felt cold spread through his chest. "He blackmailed them." "No." Ellen shook her head. "He hid. He spent 35 years hiding, moving from place to place until he finally settled here. Built this chamber, moved everything underground. He thought if he stayed quiet long enough, they'd forget. They didn't." "How do you know all this?" "Because I was his handler. I worked for a federal task force investigating organized crime and political corruption. Raymond was supposed to be our witness. But the case fell apart, got buried, and people on our own side started dying. I went underground too, changed my name, changed my life. But I kept in touch with Raymond, made sure he was okay." Marcus stared at her. This was insane. All of it. "So what do I do with all this?" he asked, gesturing to the fortune surrounding them. Ellen met his eyes. "That depends. You can walk away right now, seal this chamber, pretend you never found it, and maybe live a quiet life. Or you can do what your uncle never could. Use it. Expose the truth. Finish what he started." "And get myself killed?" "Probably." She didn't sugarcoat it. "But the people who buried this, the powerful men Raymond had proof against, they're old now. Some are dead. The networks have changed. This evidence is 45 years old. It might not be worth killing over anymore." "Might?" "There are no guarantees. But if you're going to make a decision, make it fast. Because the fact that you opened that chamber, someone's going to notice. They've had people watching this property on and off for decades, and when they realize you found it, they're coming." Marcus looked around the chamber again, at the gold, the cash, the documents, a fortune built on secrets and fear. His uncle had spent his entire life trapped by it, and now, through blood and inheritance, it was his burden to carry. He thought about the men who'd laughed at him yesterday, the sheriff who'd warned him, the town that already thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. Maybe choosing to stay in this shack to dig into its mysteries was the act of a madman, but walking away wasn't in his nature, never had been. He looked at Ellen. "Tell me everything, every name, every detail. If I'm going to do this, I need to know what I'm up against." Something like respect flickered in her eyes. "Then we better get comfortable, because this story goes deeper than you can imagine." Outside, the sun was setting over Crooked Ridge. The shack sat silent and dark, hiding the secret that had slept beneath it for decades. In town, people were sitting down to dinner, talking about the strange mountain man who'd moved into the condemned property. They had no idea what he'd just uncovered, no idea that $275 million in gold, cash, and evidence sat beneath rotting floorboards. No idea that powerful people in distant cities were about to turn their attention to a forgotten shack in a forgotten town. And Marcus Brennan, the man they'd called crazy, stood at the center of it all, holding a secret that could destroy lives or change them forever. The only question was which one it would be. Ellen pulled a small folding stool from behind one of the crates and sat down with a heavy sigh. The gesture was so casual, so familiar, that Marcus realized she'd been here before, many times. "Your Uncle Raymond wasn't always a hermit," she began, her voice echoing softly in the stone chamber. "Back in 1978, he was 28 years old, working as a driver for a luxury car service in Washington. Good kid, kept his head down, sent money home to his mother every month. He had no idea the night of September 14th would change his life forever." Marcus leaned against the metal shelving, rifle still in hand but no longer raised. He needed to hear this. That night, Raymond was assigned to pick up a client from a private airfield outside the city. Routine job, or so he thought. But when he arrived, he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. 3 men standing beside a plane surrounded by cases, military cases, the kind used for transporting weapons or cash. One of the men was Senator James Whitmore. You've probably never heard of him, but back then, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington. Defense Committee, intelligence oversight, the works. Ellen paused, her eyes distant, remembering. The second man was Viktor Sokolov, a Soviet attaché who wasn't supposed to be within 50 miles of Washington without an escort. And the third was Anthony Marcello, a known associate of the Gambino crime family. 3 men who should never have been in the same room, let alone the same airfield at midnight, surrounded by $10 million in unmarked bills. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Raymond saw the exchange. He saw everything. He was supposed to wait in the car, but he'd gotten out to smoke a cigarette. They didn't notice him in the shadows. He watched them load the cases into the plane, watched them shake hands, heard enough of their conversation to understand what was happening. Arms deals, information trades, money laundering through offshore accounts. It was a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. So they tried to kill him. Ellen nodded grimly. They realized he was there about 10 seconds after the plane took off. Senator Whitmore pointed right at him. Marcello's men came running. Raymond did the only thing he could. He ran, got to his car and drove. They chased him through 3 counties, shot out his back window. He crashed the car into a ditch, ran into the woods, and disappeared. How did he survive? He was smart. He knew if he went to the police, he'd be dead within hours. So he went underground, literally. He broke into a storage facility, stole one of the trucks, and inside that truck were 20 crates marked for disposal. Federal evidence from a corrupted case. The senator's insurance policy. Documents, recordings, and $35 million in cash and gold that was supposed to disappear. Raymond took it all. Marcus stared at her. He stole evidence? He took the only leverage that could keep him alive. For the next 6 years he moved constantly, changed his name, dyed his hair, worked cash jobs in places nobody looked twice. He slowly acquired more proof, more evidence, documenting everything he could about the network. That $35 million grew as he recovered assets from dead drops, abandoned safe houses, places the conspirators had forgotten about. By the time he settled here in 1984, he was sitting on over $200 million in assets and enough documentation to bring down half of Washington. Why didn't he use it? Ellen's expression hardened. Because they killed everyone who tried. The task force I worked for, we were getting close to breaking the case wide open in 1986. We had witnesses, paper trails, everything we needed. Then one by one my colleagues started dying. Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides that weren't suicides. Within 8 months, 12 federal agents were dead. The case got buried so deep it might as well have never existed. I barely escaped with my life. The chamber felt colder suddenly. Marcus looked around at the crates, the boxes, the fortune that had cost so many people everything. So Raymond just sat on it. What choice did he have? He built this chamber, spent years carving it out by hand, stone by stone, moved everything down here, sealed it up. He became the crazy hermit on Crooked Ridge because crazy hermits get left alone. People thought he'd lost his mind, but he was the sanest man I knew. Paranoid, yes, but for good reason. They never stopped looking. Even after the senator died in 2001, even after the Soviet Union collapsed, the network that grew from that night in '78 kept searching. Marcus pushed off from the shelving and walked deeper into the chamber. His flashlight revealed more details he'd missed in his initial shock. Along the far wall, behind the safes and lockboxes, was another opening, another tunnel. "Where does that go?" he asked. Ellen followed his gaze. "I don't know. Raymond never showed me. Said it was his final insurance, his escape route if they ever found him. I respected his privacy enough not to push." Marcus approached the opening. It was smaller than the main tunnel, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. He'd have to crawl. He aimed his flashlight inside and saw that it extended at least 50 feet before turning. "I'm going in," he said. "Are you sure that's wise? If I'm inheriting this nightmare, I need to know everything." Ellen didn't argue. Marcus set down his rifle, kept his flashlight, and got on his hands and knees. The tunnel was tight, the walls rough and cold. He crawled forward, his breathing loud in the confined space. The passage sloped gradually downward, taking him deeper beneath the mountain. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was smaller, maybe 15 feet square, and the air here was different, drier, colder. Marcus stood and swept his light across the space. What he saw took his breath away. This wasn't a storage room. It was a shrine. Along one wall, photographs were pinned to a corkboard. Dozens of them. Men in suits, women in elegant dresses, all labeled with names and dates. Senator Whitmore, 1978. Viktor Sokolov, 1979, deceased. Anthony Marcello, 1983, imprisoned. But there were more recent photos too. People Marcus didn't recognize, younger faces, dates from the 90s, the 2000s, even recent years, 2020, 2022. His uncle hadn't just been hiding. He'd been watching, tracking, documenting. The conspiracy hadn't died with the original players. It had evolved, grown, spread like roots through soil. Beneath the corkboard was a desk, not rough like the one in the main chamber, but polished, carefully maintained. On it sat a leather journal, thick and worn. Marcus picked it up and opened it to a random page. The handwriting was small, precise, obsessive. March 7th, 2015. Subject 17 met with Subject 23 at location Delta. Exchange confirmed. Wire transfer traced to shell company in Cayman Islands. Link to original network established. Marcus flipped to another page. June 19th, 2019. Senator Whitmore's grandson elected to state legislature. Campaign funded by PAC with ties to Marcello family operations. The cycle continues, page after page, year after year. His uncle had documented everything. Names, dates, locations, transactions. It was a map of corruption that spanned 4 decades. On the desk's surface, beneath the journal, Marcus found something else. A letter, sealed in plastic, addressed to whoever finds this. His hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting matched the journal. Raymond's final words. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. I hope it was peaceful, though I doubt it. I've lived in fear for 46 years, waiting for the knock on the door that never came. Maybe they forgot about me. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth the risk. Or maybe they're just patient. I've spent my life gathering this evidence, documenting their crimes, hoping someone would care enough to use it. But I couldn't. I was too afraid. Too broken. I chose survival over justice, and I'll die knowing I failed. But maybe you're braver than me. Maybe you're the one who can finish this. Everything in this chamber, the gold, the cash, the documents, it's all yours. Not because you deserve it, but because I have no one else to give it to. Use it wisely. Use it to expose them. Or use it to disappear and live the life I never could. Just know this. They're still out there. The names have changed, but the network remains. And if you choose to fight them, they'll come for you with everything they have. I'm sorry for leaving you this burden, but I had no choice. Blood is blood, and you're all I have left. Raymond Brennan. Marcus read the letter 3 times. each word sinking deeper into his consciousness. His uncle had been a prisoner of this secret, trapped between fear and conscience, and now that prison belonged to Marcus. He looked around the shrine room. On another wall, he spotted something he'd missed. A map of the United States, marked with pins and strings. Red pins clustered around Washington, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Blue strings connected them in web-like patterns. Each pin had a tiny label, names, addresses, businesses. This was a target list. Everyone connected to the original conspiracy and its descendants. Marcus took photographs with an old camera he found on the desk. The film was probably decades old, but he didn't have his phone down here, had left it in the truck. He photographed the corkboard, the journal pages, the map, everything. If something happened to him, if this chamber got sealed or destroyed, at least there would be some record. When he finally crawled back through the tunnel to the main chamber, Ellen was exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the stool, waiting patiently. "Well?" she asked. "It's worse than you said, much worse. The network didn't die, it adapted." Ellen closed her eyes and nodded slowly, as if she'd suspected as much. Raymond mentioned toward the end that he'd found new connections, younger players. I thought it was his paranoia getting worse. I guess I was wrong. Marcus began cataloguing the main chamber more systematically now, understanding that every item here was both evidence and currency. He opened more crates, finding not just gold bars, but rare artifacts. Ancient coins, each one potentially worth tens of thousands. Paintings, small but clearly valuable, wrapped in protective cloth. A collection of vintage watches that would make collectors weep. One crate contained nothing but diamonds, loose stones, each one tagged with weight and grade. Marcus held one up to his flashlight. It caught the light and threw rainbows across the stone walls. He'd never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. Another crate held cash in multiple currencies. American dollars, yes, but also British pounds, German marks from before the euro, Swiss francs, Japanese yen. Raymond had prepared for any eventuality, any need to flee to any corner of the world. The documentation was the most damning. Box after box of files, photographs, recordings on old cassette tapes, and even older reel-to-reel spools. Bank statements showing wire transfers between shell companies. Ledgers documenting payoffs and bribes. Affidavits from witnesses who were probably long dead. Intercepted letters between conspirators. It was enough to fill a library. Enough to end careers, topple dynasties, send dozens of powerful people to prison. If anyone believed it. If anyone cared about crimes committed 40 years ago by people who were now pillars of their communities. Marcus sat down on one of the crates, suddenly overwhelmed. The fortune itself was staggering. He did rough calculations in his head. If the gold alone was worth 200 million and the artifacts another 50 million and the cash 25 million, he was looking at close to $275 million. 275 million. He could live like a king for the rest of his life, never work another day, buy a mansion, travel the world, do whatever he wanted. All he had to do was sell it quietly, piece by piece, through channels that didn't ask questions. But the evidence, that was the real wealth, the real power. The ability to bring justice, however delayed, to men who'd thought themselves untouchable. "What are you thinking?" Ellen asked quietly. "I'm thinking my uncle was right to be paranoid, and I'm thinking I need to decide what kind of man I want to be." "There's a third option," Ellen said, "the hardest one, which is use the money to protect the evidence, fund a real investigation, hire lawyers, investigators, journalists who can't be bought. Build a case so airtight that even the most corrupt judge couldn't dismiss it. Your uncle couldn't do it because he was alone, but you don't have to be." Marcus looked at her. "You'd help me? I'm 72 years old. I have maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I've spent 40 of them hiding, pretending that case never happened, living with the guilt of all the people who died while I did nothing. If you're willing to try, then yes, I'll help. I'll give you every contact I have, every piece of knowledge I gathered. We'll do what your uncle couldn't. What happens next will turn this fortune into something far more dangerous than money, reveal connections that reach into the highest levels of power and force Marcus to choose between a comfortable lie and a deadly truth. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Before Marcus could respond, they heard it. A sound from above, from the shack. Not wind, not settling. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the rotting floorboards. Marcus and Ellen locked eyes. He grabbed his rifle and switched off his flashlight. She did the same. The chamber plunged into darkness so complete it felt solid. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately across the floor above. Whoever it was, they were searching. Marcus heard furniture being moved, drawers being opened. They were looking for something. Ellen leaned close and whispered directly into his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "They're checking to see if you found it. If they come down here, we can't let them leave. They'll bring others." Marcus's heart hammered. He'd been in dangerous situations before. Bar fights, angry loggers, a grizzly bear once that had gotten too close to his camp. But this was different. This was calculated, organized threat. The kind that didn't stop until it got what it wanted. The footsteps moved toward the area where Marcus had pried up the floorboards. There was a long pause. Then a male voice, muffled by the floor, called out, "Whoever you are, I know you're down there. I can see fresh pry marks on the foundation stone. You've got about 30 seconds to come up peacefully, or this gets messy." Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe. Beside him, Ellen was equally still. Another voice, different from the first, spoke. "Check the truck. See what supplies he brought. Maybe he's just camping in the woods." "With his truck here?" "Nah, he's below. Found it." A pause. "Call Thompson. Tell him the package is active." Package. That's what they called the fortune. Like it was cargo instead of evidence that could destroy them. Marcus heard more movement, then a metallic sound. They were lowering something through the hole in the floor, a rope or a ladder. They were coming down. He and Ellen had 3 choices: fight, hide, or run deeper. The shrine room had no other exits that he'd seen. They'd be trapped. But the main chamber had multiple shelving units, plenty of places to take cover. Marcus made his decision. He tapped Ellen's arm twice, their prearranged signal from when they'd first started talking. She understood immediately. They moved silently toward the far corner of the chamber, putting the metal shelves between themselves and the tunnel entrance. A flashlight beam appeared in the tunnel, then another. 2 men, maybe more. The light swept across the chamber, catching the edges of crates and glinting off gold. "Jesus Christ," one of them breathed. "It's all here, all of it." "Thompson's going to lose his mind," the second voice said. "After 30 years, we finally found it." They entered the chamber cautiously, weapons drawn. Marcus could see them now in the glow of their flashlights. Both wore dark clothing, tactical gear, the kind professionals used, not local thugs, not amateurs. These were the people his uncle had feared. One of them pulled out a radio. "Thompson, this is Bennett. Package confirmed. Estimate 200 plus in assets. We need a full extraction team and transport." The radio crackled. "Copy that. Sit tight. Team en route. ETA 40 minutes. And Bennett, if anyone else is down there, handle it. No witnesses." Marcus's blood ran cold. No witnesses. That meant anyone who knew about this chamber was a liability, including him. The 2 men began systematically photographing the crates, cataloging what they'd found. They were methodical, professional, but they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed Marcus and Ellen had fled or were hiding passively. Marcus had never been passive in his life. He waited until both men had their backs turned, focused on the shelving. Then he stepped out from cover, rifle raised. "Don't move," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Both men spun, weapons coming up instinctively, but Marcus had the advantage of surprise and positioning. His rifle was already aimed at center mass of the closer man. "I said, don't move. Drop the weapons, now." For a frozen moment, nobody moved. The tension was so thick Marcus could feel it pressing against his skin. Then the man called Bennett smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "You must be the nephew, Marcus, right? We've been wondering when you'd show up." "Drop the weapons," Marcus repeated. "Can't do that." See, we've been looking for this place for a very long time. Your uncle was clever, hiding it so well. But we knew eventually someone would inherit, someone would get curious. We've had people watching this property for 3 years, waiting. And here you are. I won't ask again.
Bennett's smile widened. You're not going to shoot us. You're not a killer. We know everything about you, Marcus. Former logger, keeps to himself, stays out of trouble. You've never even been arrested. You're not the type to murder 2 men in cold blood.
Maybe not, Ellen said, stepping out from behind a different shelf. She held an old revolver, one Marcus hadn't known she had. But I am. Bennett, I know who you work for. I know what you've done. And I have absolutely no problem adding 2 more names to the list of people who died trying to bury this evidence. Bennett's expression changed. The smile vanished. Ellen Marsh, they said you were dead.
They were wrong about a lot of things.
The second man, younger and clearly less experienced, looked nervous now. His weapon wavered between Marcus and Ellen, unable to decide which threat was greater.
Here's what's going to happen, Ellen continued. You're going to set down your weapons, slowly. Then you're going to tell us exactly who Thompson is, where he operates from, and how many people he has. And then Marcus and I are going to tie you up and leave you here while we figure out our next move.
And if we don't, Bennett challenged, then this chamber becomes your tomb. I've spent 40 years preparing for this moment. I'm not walking away now. Marcus saw the calculation in Bennett's eyes. The man was weighing odds, looking for angles, but he was also smart enough to know that 2 guns against 2 targets in an enclosed space meant someone was definitely dying. The only question was who. Bennett lowered his weapon slowly. All right, you win this round, but Thompson's team is already on the way. They'll be here in 35 minutes. You're not getting out of this. That's our problem, not yours, Marcus said. He moved forward carefully and kicked Bennett's weapon away, then did the same with the second man's gun. Ellen kept her revolver trained on both, while Marcus searched them for additional weapons. He found 3 knives, a backup pistol, and 2 phones. He took everything, and then used rope from one of the crates to bind their hands and feet. He wasn't gentle about it. These men had been prepared to kill him and Ellen without hesitation. Once they were secured, Marcus picked up one of their radios. He turned to Ellen. We have maybe 30 minutes before more arrive. What do we do? Ellen was already moving, grabbing specific boxes from the shelves with practiced efficiency. We take what we need, the most damning evidence, enough cash to fund what comes next, and we seal this place behind us. They'll get in eventually, but we'll have a head start.
Where do we go?
I have a place. Somewhere they don't know about. We'll regroup there and plan our next move. Marcus helped her gather documents, selected files that looked particularly important, and filled 2 large duffel bags. He also grabbed several gold bars, not enough to be greedy, but enough to fund their operation for years if necessary. While they worked, Bennett spoke up. You're making a mistake. Thompson isn't just some criminal, he's connected. Federal judges, senators, CEOs. You go public with this, they'll destroy you, ruin your reputation, freeze your assets, make you disappear. You're nobody, Marcus, a mountain man with no credibility and no allies. Maybe, Marcus said, not stopping his work. But I'd rather die trying than live knowing I hid from the truth like my uncle did. He looked at the fortune surrounding him, the $275 million in assets that had cost his uncle everything. It would have been so easy to take it and run, to sell it quietly and live comfortably forever. But his uncle's letter echoed in his mind. Maybe you're braver than me. Marcus wasn't sure if he was brave or just stubborn, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't walking away. Ellen finished packing and looked at him. Ready? One more thing, Marcus said. He pulled out the camera from the shrine room and took photographs of Bennett and his partner. Insurance. If anything happens to us, these photos get sent to every news outlet in the country along with everything we know. Bennett's face darkened, but he said nothing. Marcus and Ellen gathered their bags, their weapons, and headed for the tunnel. At the entrance, Marcus turned back one last time. The chamber looked different now, not like a treasure vault, but like a battlefield. The first shot in a war that had been brewing for 45 years. They crawled through the tunnel, emerged into the crawl space, and pulled themselves up through the floor. The shack was empty. Bennett's team hadn't posted guards, too confident in their ability to handle whatever they found below. That confidence would cost them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Marcus threw the bags into his truck while Ellen ran to her own vehicle, an old sedan parked up the road. She'd been more careful than he'd realized, never announcing her presence.
"Follow me," she called. "Stay close. We've got a long drive ahead."
Marcus climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out onto the dirt road. In his rear-view mirror, he could see the shack growing smaller, its sagging roof and rotting walls hiding the secret that had just changed his life forever. He'd come to Timber Falls looking for solitude, for a place to disappear and start over. Instead, he'd found purpose. Dangerous, possibly fatal purpose, but purpose nonetheless. His uncle Raymond had spent 46 years running from this moment. Marcus was done running. Whatever came next, whoever Thompson was, whatever resources he commanded, Marcus would face it. Because some truths were worth dying for. And $275 million in evidence was a truth that demanded to be told. As they drove away from Crooked Ridge, neither Marcus nor Ellen saw the third man. He stood in the tree line, camera in hand, photographing their vehicles. He lifted a radio to his lips. "Thompson, this is Reeves. The nephew took the bait. He's got Marsh with him. They're mobile." The response was immediate. "Excellent. Stay on them. Let them lead us to wherever they think is safe. Then we'll collect everything at once. The evidence, the money, and anyone who knows about it." "Copy that." The man vanished into the forest as silently as he'd appeared. The hunt had begun. The safe house was a cabin tucked 40 miles into the wilderness, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't been maintained in a decade. Ellen led Marcus through switchbacks and dense forest until they finally pulled up to a structure that looked abandoned from the outside, but proved surprisingly well kept within. "I bought this place in 1992, Ellen explained as they carried the duffel bags inside. "Paid cash, no paper trail. Your uncle was the only person who knew about it, and he's gone now. We should be safe here for a few days while we figure out our next move." The cabin was simple but functional. One main room with a wood stove, a kitchenette, 2 small bedrooms, and a cellar that had been converted into a document storage area. Ellen had been preparing for this moment for decades. Marcus set the bags down and immediately went to the windows, checking sight lines and approach routes. Old habits from years in the wilderness. Always know your exits. Always understand the terrain. "Tell me about Thompson," he said without turning around. Ellen lit a kerosene lamp, the electricity having been shut off years ago. In the warm glow, her face looked older, more tired. "David Thompson, 74 years old now. He was Senator Whitmore's chief of staff back in '78, the one who coordinated everything. After Whitmore died, Thompson inherited the network. He spent the last 23 years consolidating power, expanding operations. He's legitimate now, officially. Runs a private equity firm, sits on charity boards, donates to hospitals. But underneath, he's still the same man who ordered 12 federal agents killed. How do we stop him? We don't, not directly. Men like Thompson don't go down from frontal assaults. They have too many layers of protection, too many people who owe them favors. We have to expose the foundation, the original crime, and let the weight of it collapse everything he's built on top." Marcus finally turned from the window. "The evidence from the chamber." "Exactly. But we need more than just documents. We need corroboration, living witnesses, a narrative that the media can't ignore. And we need to move fast because Thompson won't wait. He'll come at us with everything he has." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd forgotten he had it. The signal out here was weak but present. He pulled it out and saw 7 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize and 3 text messages. The first message was simple. "We need to talk. Sheriff Cole." The second, "Bennett and Davis are missing. What did you find?" The third, "Marcus, if you're reading this, don't trust anyone. Come to my office, alone." Marcus showed the messages to Ellen.
She frowned.
Could be legitimate. Or Thompson could have gotten to her.
Only one way to find out, Marcus said. He typed a response. Can't come in. Not safe. Meet me at the old sawmill on Route 9 tomorrow at dawn. Come alone.
The reply came within seconds. I'll be there.
Ellen shook her head. This is a mistake. She could bring Thompson's whole team.
She could, but something in my gut says she's not part of this. She warned me the first day, told me to call if anything felt off. Maybe she's been watching Thompson's people too.
Or maybe that's exactly what she wants you to think.
Marcus didn't have a good answer to that.
Trust was a currency he'd rarely traded in, and now his life depended on spending it wisely.
They spent the evening organizing the documents they'd taken from the chamber. Ellen had brought a laptop with no internet connection, an old model from the early 2000s that couldn't be remotely accessed. They began scanning papers, creating a digital backup of the most critical evidence. The photographs from Raymond's shrine room were particularly damning. Men in suits shaking hands with known criminals. Wire transfer receipts showing millions moving through shell companies. Handwritten notes discussing eliminations and accidents. It was a prosecutor's dream and a conspiracy theorist's vindication. But as Marcus read deeper into his uncle's journals, he began to see something that troubled him. Raymond hadn't just documented the conspiracy, he'd profited from it. Several entries detailed how he'd used insider information from intercepted communications to make investments, buy properties before development was announced, sell stock before crashes. The $35 million he'd started with had grown to $275 million, not just from theft, but from systematic insider trading spanning 3 decades.
Ellen, Marcus said quietly, looking up from the journal. My uncle used this information to get rich. He was part of the corruption in his own way.
Ellen stopped scanning and met his eyes. I know.
You knew?
Of course I knew. Raymond was a victim, yes, but he was also an opportunist. He told himself he was just surviving, using their own weapons against them. But the truth is more complicated. He became what he feared. Not violent like them, but morally compromised. The money you found isn't just evidence. It's proceeds from crime. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. So everything in that chamber is tainted.
Not everything. The original evidence, the documents proving the arms deals and murders, those are clean. But the fortune itself, yes, much of it came from exploitation. Does that change what you want to do?
Marcus stood and walked to the window again. Outside, the forest was black and impenetrable. He thought about the men in town who'd mocked him, who'd called him crazy for buying a condemned shack. They'd been right in a way. He was crazy to think this could be simple, that justice and righteousness would be clean and clear. It makes it harder, he admitted. How do I expose corruption when I'm holding the profits of corruption? Who's going to believe anything I say when I'm sitting on $200 million I got from a dead hermit? You're thinking about this wrong, Ellen said. The money isn't yours. It never was. It's restitution waiting to be paid. Evidence waiting to be entered into the record. You're not the owner. You're the executor of your uncle's unfinished business. Pretty words. But when Thompson's lawyers get done with me, I'll look like a grave robber trying to profit from stolen goods. Only if you keep it. What if you don't?
Marcus turned to look at her. What are you suggesting?
Use it for what it was meant to do. Fund the investigation, pay for protection, hire the best lawyers and investigators money can buy. And when it's all over, when Thompson and everyone connected to him is behind bars, whatever's left goes to the victims. The families of the agents who were killed, the communities that were harmed by their deals, turn blood money into justice money. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications, because it meant Marcus would end this with nothing. No fortune, no security, just the satisfaction of doing what was right. He thought about his life before he'd opened that letter from the lawyer, working seasonal jobs, sleeping in a cabin with no electricity, eating beans from a can. He'd been content then, poor but free. This fortune had brought him nothing but danger and moral complexity.
All right, he said finally. We do it your way. But first, we stay alive long enough to make it happen. They took turns sleeping that night, one always awake and watching. Marcus took the first shift, sitting in the dark with his rifle across his lap. The cabin creaked and settled around him. Every sound could be a threat. Every shadow could be an enemy. He thought about Bennett's words. "You're nobody, Marcus. A mountain man with no credibility and no allies." It was true. He was one man against an organization that had survived for 45 years. The odds were worse than bad. But maybe that had been Raymond's mistake, trying to fight alone. Maybe the key was finding allies, building a coalition of people who wanted the truth as badly as he did. At dawn, Marcus drove alone to the abandoned sawmill on Route 9. He'd left Ellen at the cabin with strict instructions to disappear if he didn't return by noon. The mill had been closed since 2008, its machinery rusted and silent, the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Sheriff Cole was already there, leaning against her cruiser, arms crossed. She watched him pull in with an expression he couldn't read. "You look like hell," she said as he approached. "It's been a long 24 hours. "I can imagine. Bennett and Davis haven't reported in. Their vehicle was found outside your property. Want to tell me what happened?" Marcus studied her carefully. She could be working for Thompson, setting him up for an ambush, or she could be exactly what she appeared to be, a law enforcement officer trying to understand a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. He made a choice. "They came looking for something my uncle hid. They found it, and they told me they were under orders to leave no witnesses, so I left them in the place they were trying to rob and got out before reinforcements arrived." Sheriff Cole's expression didn't change, but her hand moved away from her weapon. "What did they find?" "Evidence of a conspiracy that goes back to 1978. Arms deals, political corruption, murder. My uncle Raymond witnessed it all and spent his life documenting it." "And you have this evidence?" "Some of it, the most important parts." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to know if you're working for Thompson or if you're actually one of the good ones, and I figure the best way to find out is to trust you and see what you do next." She was quiet for a long moment. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in the early morning light. Finally, she spoke. "David Thompson has owned this town for longer than I've been alive. His company bought the lumber mill in '93, shut it down, and bought up the land for nothing. Half the people here work for companies he controls. The mayor, the county commissioners, they all take his money. I've suspected for years that something wasn't right, but I never had proof. And anyone who asked too many questions ended up transferred, fired, or worse." "So you're not on his payroll?" "Hell no. I became sheriff because my father was sheriff, and he taught me that the badge means something. It means you serve justice, not power. If what you're saying is true, if you have real evidence, I'll help you. But you need to understand what you're up against. Thompson doesn't just have money. He has influence. He can make evidence disappear, witnesses recant, records vanish. You're not fighting one man, you're fighting a system." "Then we change the system." Sheriff Cole almost smiled. "You really are as crazy as your uncle." "Apparently it runs in the family." She pushed off from the cruiser and walked closer. "All right, tell me what you need." Over the next hour, Marcus laid out everything. The chamber beneath the shack, the fortune, the evidence, Ellen's involvement, Thompson's network. Sheriff Cole listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When he finished, she let out a long breath. "Jesus, this is bigger than I thought." "Can you help?" "I can try. But we need more than just the two of us and an old federal agent. We need people Thompson can't touch, people with resources and credibility." "Like who?" "There's a federal prosecutor in the Capitol, Andrea Vance. She's made her career going after public corruption. Took down a governor 2 years ago, sent a judge to prison last year. She's clean as far as I know, and she's ambitious enough that a case like this would be her legacy." "How do we approach her without tipping off Thompson?" "Carefully, very carefully." They made plans to meet again in 2 days.
Sheriff Cole would reach out to contacts she trusted, feel out the possibility of federal protection. Marcus would continue organizing the evidence with Ellen, and both would watch their backs every second. As Marcus drove back toward the cabin, he noticed a truck following him. Black Dodge, tinted windows, staying 3 cars back. Professional tail. He'd expected this, but hoped for more time. He didn't try to lose them. Instead, he drove past the turnoff to Ellen's cabin and continued toward town. If they were going to follow him, he'd lead them somewhere that didn't compromise his only ally. He pulled into the parking lot of Sullivan's Diner, the same place where the men had mocked him his first day in Timber Falls. It was 8 in the morning, and the lot was full of trucks and work vehicles, people getting breakfast before heading to job sites. Marcus walked inside. The diner went quiet as he entered, conversation dying like a candle snuffed out. He recognized faces from that first day. The man in the feed store cap, the tall one with the tobacco-stained mustache, others he'd seen around town. He walked to the counter and sat down. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, approached cautiously. "Coffee," Marcus said. She poured without comment. The diner remained silent. Marcus could feel eyes on his back. Finally, someone spoke. "Heard you had some excitement up at your place yesterday." Marcus turned. It was the man in the feed store cap, sitting in a booth with 2 others. His expression wasn't mocking anymore. It was curious. "You could say that," Marcus replied. "Sheriff Cole's been asking questions around town. Says you might have found something important up there. Something dangerous." Marcus made a split-second decision. If Thompson's people were watching, they already knew where he was. Might as well use it. "My Uncle Raymond was protecting evidence of a crime, a big one. People have died to keep it secret, and the man responsible for those deaths owns half this town." You could have heard a pin drop. Someone coughed nervously. The man in the booth leaned forward. "You talking about Thompson?" "I'm talking about a conspiracy that's been bleeding this town dry for 30 years. The mill closing? That was Thompson. The factory layoffs in 2004? Thompson. The bank foreclosures in 2010? All Thompson. He bought this place piece by piece and turned it into his personal empire, and anyone who questions him ends up gone." The tall man with the mustache stood up. "That's a pretty serious accusation, friend." "It's not an accusation, it's fact, and I have proof." The diner erupted in conversation. Some people looked angry, others skeptical, but a few, Marcus noticed, looked relieved, like they'd been waiting years for someone to finally say it out loud. The man in the feed store cap stood and walked to the counter. Up close, Marcus could see his name tag, Dale. "If what you're saying is true," Dale said quietly, "half the people in here will want you gone. Thompson signs their paychecks, but the other half, the ones who lost jobs or homes or family members, they'll listen. Question is, what do you want from us?" "Nothing yet. Just plant the seed. Make people think. Because when this breaks, when the evidence goes public, this town's going to have to decide what side of history it wants to be on." Dale studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the dumbest. Time will tell which." He walked back to his booth. Marcus finished his coffee and stood to leave. As he reached the door, a voice called out, "Hey, Mountain Man!" Marcus turned. It was a younger guy, maybe 30, wearing Carhartt overalls and work boots. "My dad worked at the mill, worked there 23 years. When Thompson shut it down, Dad couldn't find other work. Started drinking. Died of cirrhosis in 2012. If you're really going after Thompson, you let me know. I'll help however I can." Others murmured agreement. Not everyone, but enough. Marcus nodded once and walked out. The black Dodge was still in the parking lot. Marcus looked directly at it as he walked to his truck, making sure they saw him seeing them. Let them know he wasn't afraid. Let them report back that he was rallying support, because that's exactly what he intended to do. Over the next 3 days, the game intensified. Thompson's people stopped hiding. Black SUVs drove slowly past the cabin. Marcus found a GPS tracker under his truck. Someone broke into Sheriff Cole's office and went through her files.
But Marcus didn't back down. With Ellen's help, he began reaching out to people. Former employees of Thompson's companies who'd been wrongfully terminated, families who'd lost homes to foreclosure, business owners who'd been forced to sell. One by one, he heard their stories, and one by one, they agreed to speak on record if the time came. The man who'd mocked Marcus that first day, Dale, turned out to be a former accountant. He'd worked for one of Thompson's subsidiaries in the 90s and had been fired for asking questions about creative bookkeeping. He still had copies of documents he'd smuggled out, showing how Thompson moved money through shell corporations to avoid taxes and hide assets. The tall man with the mustache, whose name was Roy, had been a union organizer at the mill. He had records of safety violations Thompson had covered up, including an accident in 2002 that had killed 3 workers. The families had been paid off and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, but Roy had kept copies of everything. Even the young man in Carhart's, whose name was Jesse, had something to contribute. His father's medical records showing the decline that Thompson's insurance company had refused to cover, claiming alcoholism was a pre-existing condition. Slowly, painfully, Marcus was building a case, not just against Thompson's conspiracy, but against everything he'd done to this town. It was personal for these people. They weren't fighting for justice in the abstract. They were fighting for their families, their futures, their dignity. Ellen worked around the clock, organizing documents, creating timelines, connecting dots. She was in her element, finally using all the investigative skills she'd suppressed for 40 years. On the 4th night, Sheriff Cole called with news. She'd made contact with federal prosecutor Andrea Vance. The prosecutor was interested, very interested, but she needed more before she could move. She needed testimony from someone inside Thompson's organization, someone who could corroborate the evidence and testify to ongoing criminal activity. "That's a problem," Marcus said. "Everyone who works for Thompson is either loyal or terrified." "Maybe not everyone," Sheriff Cole replied. "There's a man named Carson Webb. He was Thompson's head of security for 15 years, retired last year, lives in a trailer park outside town, keeps to himself. But I've heard rumors he didn't leave on good terms. Think he'd talk?" "Only one way to find out." The next morning, Marcus and Sheriff Cole drove to the trailer park. Carson Webb's home was a small double-wide with a neat yard and a Harley parked under a carport. A man in his 60s answered the door, lean and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. "To talk," Marcus said, "about David Thompson." Webb's expression hardened. "I got nothing to say about him, even if it means finally putting him in prison." Webb stared at Marcus for a long moment, then at Sheriff Cole. "You wearing a wire?" "No." "Prove it." Marcus pulled up his shirt, turned around. Sheriff Cole did the same. Webb studied them, then stepped back and opened the door wider. 5 minutes, that's all you get." Inside, the trailer was spartanly furnished but clean. Webb gestured to a worn couch and sat across from them in a recliner. "I worked for Thompson from 2004 to 2023, Webb began. "Started as a security guard, worked my way up. I've seen things, done things I'm not proud of, but I told myself it was just business, just keeping order. It wasn't until my daughter got sick, needed cancer treatment, that I saw the real Thompson." He paused, emotion flickering across his face. His insurance company denied her claim, said the treatment was experimental. She died 6 months later, owing $400,000 in medical bills. I went to Thompson, begged him to help. We'd worked together for 19 years. He looked me in the eye and said, "Business is business," told me I should have read the policy more carefully. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. "I'm sorry." Webb waved it off. "Don't be useful. What do you have on him?" Marcus laid it out. The evidence from Raymond's chamber, the documents from former employees, the timeline of crime stretching back 45 years. Webb listened intently, occasionally nodding. When Marcus finished, Webb stood and walked to a closet. He pulled out a cardboard box. "I kept copies," he said. "Everything I could get my hands on before I left. Security protocols, communication records, names of people he paid off. I was going to burn it, try to forget. But maybe it's time to remember.
He handed the box to Marcus. There's one more thing you should know. Thompson's planning something big. I don't know exactly what, but about 6 months before I left, he started moving assets, consolidating holdings, preparing for something, and whatever it is, it involves your property.
Marcus frowned. My property? The shack?
No, the land. That whole mountain. Thompson's been trying to buy it for decades. Your uncle refused to sell. After Raymond died, Thompson thought he'd finally get it through probate. When you inherited instead, he went ballistic. That land means something to him, something important. Why? I don't know. But if I were you, I'd find out. Because whatever's on that mountain, it's worth killing for. They left Webb's trailer with another box of evidence and a new mystery. Why did Thompson want Crooked Ridge so badly? What was on that mountain that made it worth more than the fortune buried beneath it? Marcus drove back to the cabin, his mind racing. Ellen was waiting, and when she saw the look on his face, she knew something had changed. What is it? She asked. Thompson doesn't just want the evidence. He wants the land. Webb said Thompson's been trying to buy it for years. Why? What's on that mountain? Ellen's face went pale. Oh God, I should have realized. Realized what? In Raymond's shrine room, did you see the geological survey maps? Marcus tried to remember. Maybe. There were a lot of papers. Ellen rushed to the boxes they'd brought from the chamber and started digging through files. She pulled out a rolled map and spread it on the table. Look, this is a geological survey from 1976, before your uncle bought the property. See these markings? Marcus leaned in. The map showed mineral deposits, underground formations, and in one area of Crooked Ridge, a notation. Significant rare earth element deposits estimated 4 to 6 billion tons. Rare earth elements, Ellen said. They're used in everything. Electronics, military equipment, renewable energy. They're worth more than gold, and there's a massive deposit under your property. Thompson's been trying to get his hands on it for decades. The fortune in the chamber was never the end game. It was always about the mountain. Marcus sat down heavily. So he doesn't care about the evidence getting out? Oh, he cares, but he cares more about those minerals. If you go public with the evidence and he loses his reputation, he loses his ability to exploit the deposit. But if he can silence you and take the property, he gets everything. 275 million in assets plus a mining operation worth billions. Then we need to move faster than he does. They worked through the night, preparing everything for the federal prosecutor. Documents were organized, witness statements recorded, timelines cross-referenced. By dawn, they had a case that would take down not just Thompson, but his entire network. Sheriff Cole arranged a meeting with Andrea Vance for the following afternoon at a secure federal building 3 hours away. They would drive separately, take different routes, and meet inside where Thompson's people couldn't reach them. But as the sun rose on what should have been their moment of triumph, Marcus received a text from an unknown number. It was a photograph, Ellen's cabin, taken from the tree line, and beneath it, a message. We know where you are. We know where Cole is. We know where everyone you've talked to is. Drop this now or they all die. You have 24 hours. Marcus showed the message to Ellen. Her face was grim, but not surprised. He's bluffing, she said. He can't kill everyone without drawing attention. Can't he? He's done it before. 12 federal agents, remember. If he's desperate enough, he'll risk it. So what do you want to do? Give up? Hand over everything and hope he lets us live? Marcus looked at the boxes of evidence, at the files representing decades of crimes and suffering. He thought about Dale and Roy and Jesse and all the others who'd trusted him with their stories. He thought about his Uncle Raymond, who'd spent 46 years paralyzed by fear. No, he said finally. We don't give up, but we don't wait 24 hours either. We move now. Today. We get this evidence to the prosecutor before Thompson can stop us. Ellen nodded. Then we better get moving. They loaded everything into Marcus's truck and Ellen's sedan. Sheriff Cole called to say she'd arranged for federal marshals to escort them to the meeting. It was happening. After 45 years of buried secrets, justice was finally within reach. As they prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look at the cabin. It had been a sanctuary for Ellen, a place to hide and wait. Now it was time to stop hiding. They pulled out onto the logging road, Marcus in front, Ellen behind. The morning was clear and cold, the forest thick on either side. Perfect ambush country. Marcus kept his rifle on the passenger seat, finger near the trigger. They'd made it 5 miles when he saw it. A tree across the road, recently fallen. Too convenient. Too perfect. He slammed on the brakes. Ellen stopped behind him. Before either could react, men emerged from the forest. 6 of them armed, tactical gear. Thompson's private army. Marcus grabbed his rifle and kicked open his door, using it as a shield. Behind him, he heard Ellen's door slam. "Nobody moves!" a voice shouted. Bennett, the man from the chamber, somehow free. "Mr. Thompson wants to have a conversation. You can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way." Marcus aimed his rifle at Bennett's chest. "Third option, you let us go, and maybe you don't spend the rest of your life in prison." Bennett laughed. "Prison? Son, by the time Thompson's lawyers are done, you'll be the one facing charges. Breaking and entering, theft, assault, we've got it all documented. You're not a whistleblower, you're a criminal. Then arrest me. Call the real police. Let's do this officially." "Can't do that. Mr. Thompson prefers to handle things personally." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. He could take Bennett, maybe one other before they returned fire. But Ellen would die. He'd die. And everything they'd worked for would disappear with them. Then he heard sirens, distant but growing closer. Bennett heard them too. His confidence faltered. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Called in a favor," Sheriff Cole's voice said over Marcus's truck radio. "Federal marshals, state police, and FBI are about 2 minutes out, so you boys have a choice. Surrender now, or explain to a judge why you were pointing guns at a federal witness." The men looked at each other, uncertainty spreading through their ranks. Bennett's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when the game was over. "This isn't finished," he said, lowering his weapon. "Yeah," Marcus replied. "It is." The sirens grew louder, and moments later, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles came around the bend. Bennett and his men were arrested on the spot. Marcus and Ellen gave brief statements, then continued to the federal building under armed escort. As they drove, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Real, tangible hope that this might actually work. But in the back of his mind, he knew Thompson wouldn't go quietly. The real fight was just beginning. The federal building was a fortress of glass and steel rising from the capital city's downtown. Marcus and Ellen were escorted through back entrances, past security checkpoints, and into a conference room on the 14th floor. Federal prosecutor Andrea Vance was already there, surrounded by files and laptop computers. She was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "Mr. Brennan," she said, extending her hand, "I've been reading the preliminary reports. If half of what Sheriff Cole told me is true, we're looking at the biggest corruption case this state has seen in 50 years. "It's all true," Marcus said. "Every word. Over the next 6 hours, they laid it out. Every document, every photograph, every witness statement." Ellen provided context from her years working the original case. Marcus explained how he'd found the chamber, what Thompson's men had said, the threats they'd made. Carson Webb was brought in under protection and gave devastating testimony about Thompson's operations. Andrea Vance took notes, asked questions, and occasionally whistled low under her breath. By the time the sun set outside the conference room windows, she leaned back in her chair. "This is incredible work," she said. "You've built a case that most prosecutors spend careers hoping to get, but you need to understand what comes next. The moment I file charges, Thompson and his attorneys will launch a counteroffensive like nothing you've seen. They'll attack your credibility, dig up every mistake you've ever made, paint you as a con man trying to profit from a dead man's paranoia." "Let them try," Marcus said. "I'm not keeping the money anyway. Andrea raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? The fortune in the chamber, $275 million. I'm turning it over. All of it. Evidence goes into the legal case. The rest gets distributed to victims, families of murdered agents, communities Thompson destroyed. I don't want a penny of it.
The room went silent. Even Ellen looked surprised.
Marcus, she said gently, you don't have to do this. Keep enough to rebuild your life, get a proper home. I had a proper life before I opened that chamber. I was content. This money has brought nothing but death and corruption for 45 years. It ends with me. All of it. Andrea studied him for a long moment, then nodded. That's going to make our case significantly stronger. Shows you have no financial motive, but Thompson won't accept this. He'll fight until he has nothing left to fight with.
Good, Marcus said, because I'm just getting started.
The next morning, Andrea Vance filed federal charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, securities fraud, obstruction of justice. Charges spanning 4 decades against David Thompson and 17 members of his organization. The indictment was sealed, but word spread quickly. By noon, Marcus's phone was ringing constantly. News organizations, documentary producers, lawyers offering to represent him. He ignored them all. There was only one call he answered. It was Dale, the man from the diner. Marcus, there's something happening in town. You need to see this. Marcus drove back to Timber Falls with a federal escort. What he found shocked him. Main Street was packed with people, hundreds of them, standing in the cold, holding signs. Justice for Raymond. Thompson's reign ends now. We stand with Marcus. Dale pushed through the crowd to reach him. Word got out about the charges. People are done being afraid. They want to help. Marcus climbed onto the bed of his truck and the crowd quieted. He'd never been comfortable with public speaking, preferred the company of trees to people. But looking out at these faces, faces marked by years of Thompson's exploitation, he found his voice. My uncle Raymond spent 46 years hiding from the truth, he called out. He thought if he stayed quiet, stayed small, he'd be safe. He died alone in a rotting shack because fear consumed him. I won't make that mistake. The evidence we've gathered proves that David Thompson and his organization have been bleeding this town, this state, this country for decades. They murdered federal agents. They stole from hard-working people. They crushed anyone who stood in their way. But that ends today. The crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus raised his hand for quiet. The fortune my uncle hid, it's not mine to keep. Every dollar is going toward making things right. Families who lost loved ones will be compensated. Workers who were cheated will receive what they're owed. And this town, Timber Falls, it's going to be rebuilt. Not by Thompson's money or Thompson's companies, but by us. By people who actually live here and care about what it becomes. More cheers. Marcus saw tears on faces, anger, hope, relief. These people had been waiting for someone to fight. Now they had permission. But even as the crowd celebrated, Marcus noticed movement at the edge. Black SUVs parked at a distance, watching. Thompson might be facing charges, but he wasn't in custody yet. Men with his resources didn't go down easy. That night, as Marcus returned to Ellen's cabin, he found her packing. What are you doing? He asked. Leaving. Not because I'm afraid, but because my part's done. I've given my testimony, provided everything I know. The rest is up to the courts and to you. Where will you go? Ellen smiled sadly. Somewhere warm, maybe the coast. I've spent 40 years in hiding. Time to actually live before I run out of time. Marcus understood. She'd carried this weight long enough. Thank you for everything. My uncle was lucky to have you. No, Ellen said. I was lucky to know him, and you. You're finishing what we started. That takes a kind of courage neither of us had. She hugged him, fierce and brief, then drove away into the darkness. Marcus watched her taillights disappear and felt profoundly alone. But it wasn't the loneliness of isolation. It was the loneliness of leadership, of standing at the front when everyone else fell back. The trial began 3 months later. David Thompson had assembled a legal team that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. They attacked every piece of evidence, questioned every witness, filed motion after motion to delay and obfuscate, but Andrea Vance was relentless. She walked the jury through 45 years of crime, document by document, testimony by testimony. She showed them photographs of agents who died mysteriously, bank records that proved Thompson's involvement, recordings from Raymond's collection that captured conversations no legitimate businessman would have. Marcus testified for 2 full days. Thompson's attorneys tried to paint him as an opportunist, a mountain man who'd stumbled onto someone else's property and decided to steal it. But Marcus remained calm, answered every question honestly, and when they accused him of profiting from his uncle's paranoia, he looked directly at the jury. "I gave everything to the prosecution," he said quietly. "Every gold bar, every dollar, every document. The only thing I kept was my truck and the tools I need to work. If I wanted to profit, I could have sold that fortune and disappeared. Instead, I'm here, because some things matter more than money." The jury deliberated for 6 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. David Thompson, 74 years old, was sentenced to 48 years in federal prison. He'd die behind bars. 17 members of his organization received similar sentences. Assets were seized, companies dissolved, the entire empire dismantled. But the real transformation happened in Timber Falls. Using the seized assets and the fortune from Raymond's chamber, a trust was established. Marcus insisted it be administered by a board of local residents, people who'd lived through Thompson's reign and understood what the town needed. The old lumber mill was purchased and reopened, not for logging, but as a manufacturing facility for renewable energy components. Those rare earth elements under Crooked Ridge, they were mined carefully, ethically, with environmental protections and fair wages. The profits went back into the community. Foreclosed homes were bought back and returned to their original owners. Medical debts were forgiven. Small businesses received interest-free loans. The school got a new building, the hospital new equipment. And Marcus's shack, the rotting log cabin that everyone had mocked, it was transformed into something unexpected. Not torn down, but carefully restored and turned into a museum. The Museum of Truth and Accountability, they called it. Inside, visitors could see Raymond's documents, learn about the 45-year conspiracy, understand how corruption worked and how it could be fought. The chamber beneath, where the fortune had been hidden, remained sealed. A memorial. A reminder that secrets always have a cost. Marcus stood on the rebuilt porch of the shack 1 year after the verdict, watching a group of schoolchildren file inside for a tour. He'd grown a bit grayer, a bit more weathered, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in decades. Dale approached, clipboard in hand. He'd become the museum's director, found purpose in teaching others about what had happened. "We've had 300 visitors this week," Dale said. "People are coming from all over the country. They want to see where it started, where one man stood up." "One man and a lot of help," Marcus corrected. "True, but you started it. You opened that chamber when you could have walked away." Marcus thought about that, the moment he'd pried up the floorboards and seen the stone beneath, the choice to keep digging instead of sealing it back up. In that moment, he'd had no idea what he was unleashing. If he'd known the danger, the fear, the weight of it all, would he have made the same choice? Yes, without hesitation, because his uncle had been right about one thing. Some secrets were too important to stay buried. Sheriff Cole pulled up in her cruiser, now wearing a chief's badge. She'd been promoted after the trial, recognition for her role in bringing down Thompson. "Got a minute?" she asked Marcus. They walked away from the museum, toward the edge of the clearing where the forest began. The view stretched for miles, valley and mountains and sky. "The state's offering you a reward," she said, "for the evidence you provided, $3 million. Marcus shook his head. "Give it to the victims' fund." "Marcus, you can't keep giving everything away. You still live in that cabin with no electricity. You work odd jobs. Let yourself have something." "I have everything I need. I've got work that matters, people who respect me, a purpose. That's more than most people get in a lifetime." Cole smiled.
You're a stubborn bastard, just like Raymond. I'll take that as a compliment. She left, and Marcus continued walking into the forest. He'd built a new cabin deeper in the woods, small and simple, but it was his. Every log he'd cut himself, every nail he'd driven. It was honest work, clean work, no secrets buried underneath. As he walked, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. He'd come to Timber Falls looking for solitude, expecting to spend his days fixing a broken shack and avoiding people. Instead, he'd uncovered a conspiracy, fought powerful enemies, and helped transform an entire community. It hadn't been easy. There were nights he'd woken in cold sweat, reliving the moment Bennett's men had surrounded him. Days he'd questioned whether it was worth the cost. But seeing what Timber Falls had become, seeing businesses open and families thrive and hope return to faces that had forgotten how to smile, he knew the answer. It had been worth every sleepless night, every threat, every moment of fear. He reached his cabin as the sun began to set. Inside it was warm and simple, a wood stove, a cot, a table with books and maps. No television, no internet, just silence and peace. He built a fire and sat watching the flames dance. Tomorrow he'd go back to the museum, help with repairs that needed doing. Next week he'd meet with the mining cooperative to discuss expansion plans. Next month there was talk of him running for town council, though he'd probably decline. Leadership was one thing, politics was another. But tonight he was just a man sitting by a fire, content in his solitude but no longer isolated. He'd found something he hadn't known he was looking for: community, purpose, belonging. A knock on the door surprised him. He opened it to find Roy, the tall man from the diner with the tobacco-stained mustache. "Sorry to bother you," Roy said, "but there's a situation. Young couple trying to start a business, repair shop. They need advice. Someone who understands how to build something from nothing. Thought you might help." Marcus grabbed his coat. "Lead the way." As they walked back toward town, Roy glanced at him. "You ever regret it? Opening that chamber? You could have just fixed up the shack, lived quiet." Marcus considered the question. "Every day," he admitted, "and then I see what's changed, and I stop regretting." They reached the repair shop, a converted garage where a young couple, neither older than 30, was struggling with a seized engine. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work, showing them how to free the pistons, replace the gaskets, make it run again. It was simple work, honest work, the kind his hands understood. As they worked, the young man asked, "Is it true what they say, that you gave away a fortune?" Marcus wiped grease from his hands. "It was never mine to keep." "But you could have been rich, set for life." "I am rich," Marcus said, looking around at the shop, the town beyond, the mountains rising in the distance. Just not in the way most people measure it. They finished the repair as the moon rose. The engine turned over, smooth and clean. The couple thanked him profusely, but Marcus waved it off. "Just pass it on," he said. "Someone needs help. You help them. That's how communities survive." Walking back to his cabin alone, Marcus thought about his uncle Raymond. The man had died thinking he'd failed, that 46 years of hiding and fear had been wasted. But he'd been wrong. Everything Raymond had documented, every piece of evidence he'd carefully preserved, had led to this moment. To justice, to healing, to a town reclaiming its soul. Raymond hadn't failed, he'd just run out of time, and Marcus had finished what his uncle started. The next morning, Marcus woke to find a letter slipped under his door, neat handwriting on expensive paper. He opened it carefully. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Elizabeth Whitmore. I'm Senator James Whitmore's granddaughter. I know you have no reason to trust anyone with my family name, but I wanted you to know something. I was 18 when my grandfather died. I thought he was a hero, a man of integrity. Learning the truth about what he did, the people he hurt, it destroyed the image I had of him. But it also freed me. I've spent the last year working with victims' families, trying to make amends in whatever small ways I can. I can never undo the harm he caused, but I can acknowledge it. Thank you for having the courage to expose the truth, even when the truth was ugly.
Some of us needed to see it. Sincerely, Elizabeth. Marcus read the letter 3 times. This was what justice looked like, not just punishment, but recognition, acknowledgement, the beginning of healing. He folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box where he kept the few things that mattered. His mother's letters, his brother's photograph, his father's pocket knife, and now this. Evidence that courage rippled outward, touching people he'd never meet. Months turned into a year. The museum thrived. The town prospered. Children who'd grown up under Thompson's shadow now grew up with opportunity. Marcus remained in his cabin, helping where needed, working with his hands, living simply. But he wasn't the hermit his uncle had been. He attended town meetings, shared meals at the diner, taught woodworking to teenagers who wanted to learn. He'd found the balance Raymond never could, solitude without isolation, independence without loneliness. One evening, as Marcus stood on the porch of his cabin watching stars emerge, he thought about the question Roy had asked. Did he regret opening that chamber? The honest answer was complicated. He regretted the danger he'd put people in. He regretted the nights of fear and the moments he'd thought they'd all die. He regretted that it had taken 45 years and countless victims before justice came. But he didn't regret fighting. He didn't regret standing up when he could have walked away. He didn't regret using his uncle's burden to lift up an entire community, because in the end, courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing what was right anyway. It was about seeing something broken and having the audacity to believe you could fix it. It was about inheriting someone else's nightmare and transforming it into collective hope. His uncle Raymond had spent his life as a prisoner of fear. But Marcus had broken those chains, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd lived under Thompson's shadow. The shack that people had mocked, the condemned building they'd called worthless, now stood as a monument, not to wealth or power, but to truth, to the idea that one person, even a nobody from nowhere, could change the world if they were stubborn enough to try. Marcus thought about the gold bars in that chamber, the $275 million that had consumed his uncle. It was all gone now, distributed to those who needed it, used for purposes that honored rather than exploited. And he felt lighter for it, freer, because he'd learned something his uncle never did. The real fortune wasn't buried beneath floorboards or hidden in darkness. It was here, in community, in purpose, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing you'd done right by others. He went inside as the temperature dropped, built up his fire, and opened a book. Tomorrow he'd help repair the school's roof. Next week, he'd teach a welding class. Next month, who knew? But whatever came, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything since that first day he'd pried up those floorboards, with his hands, his heart, and his stubborn refusal to let fear win. His uncle had hidden a fortune to protect it from those who would abuse it. Marcus had exposed it to free everyone from its curse. Both men had made their choices. Only one had found peace. And as Marcus sat by his fire, warm and content in his simple cabin, he understood what his uncle had written in that final letter. Maybe you're braver than me. He hadn't been braver, just luckier. Lucky to have Ellen's help, Sheriff Cole's courage, Andrea Vance's tenacity, and a town full of people who'd been waiting for someone to lead the fight. Courage, he'd learned, was never a solo act. It was a chorus, each voice adding to the next, building until the sound was too loud to ignore. And Timber Falls was singing now. Not the dirge it had been under Thompson's reign, but something new, something hopeful. A song of rebirth and second chances. Marcus closed his book and lay down on his cot. Through the window he could see the lights of town twinkling in the valley below. Each light was a home, a family, a story. And all of them, in some small way, had been touched by what had started in a rotting shack on Crooked Ridge. They'd laughed when the mountain man moved into that condemned building, called him crazy for choosing decay over comfort. But he'd found something beneath those floorboards that changed everything. Not just gold and documents, but purpose. Proof that secrets always surface eventually, and that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when pushed far enough. Raymond Brennan had spent 46 years hiding from the world. His nephew Marcus had spent 1 year dragging the truth into the light. Both men had shaped history, but only one would be remembered as a hero, and Marcus was fine with that. Heroes were overrated anyway. He'd rather be useful. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to dig deep enough, stand tall enough, and fight long enough. Because sometimes the greatest fortunes aren't measured in gold, but in the lives we touch and the justice we serve. As the fire died to embers and sleep pulled Marcus under, his last thought was simple. Tomorrow, the work continues. And he couldn't wait to begin. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering truth and courage. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe one person can make a difference.